In late 2003, I received an email, which I think was probably widely broadcast, sent from women in Rwanda. And it was from a group called AVEGA, which is an association of widows of the genocide, many of whom, in fact almost all of whom, also had HIV, some of which was from genocidal rape. And the women were requesting help accessing antiviral therapy for HIV. And why were they asking them? They were asking them because they had just heard through the news that at the Arusha Tribunal, which is the justice tribunal for the Rwandan genocide, the perpetrators who were being tried were all being treated with state-of-the-art antiretroviral therapy if they had HIV, because they were under international law. And the women were outraged. I responded by writing a small grant to the Stephen Lewis Foundation with some other women, including the woman who had sent me the email. We formed an organization called We Act, Women's Equity and Access to Care and Treatment, and went to Rwanda to see if we had a skill to share. So we entered Rwanda visiting women survivors of the genocide during the 10th anniversary of the genocide. And so just like the 9/11 memorial we went through, this was a deeply emotional, kind of reliving the trauma kind of time. And during that, we met with the women themselves, not just the leaders of the organizations, but actually the women. We did everything through a double translation, English to French, French to Kinyarwanda, the language of Rwanda, and then back again. And yet, we felt like we developed a fairly strong bond and really did hear the women's stories. And basically the women said, we're dying of HIV. And they were right. I had seen people die of HIV before we had treatment in the United States. And these women were going to die. And we went to several organizations and revisited the first one, the one who had actually invited us. And when the second time as we were leaving, one of the women pulled me aside and said in English, you know, a lot of people come to visit and nobody comes back, which is pretty difficult, right? And it may really be the single event that made me feel I had to go back. I mean, first of all, I was totally ignorant. I had never been to Africa. I didn't have any idea what Africa would be like. But in fact, it's not so different from being in the Bronx. The surroundings are a little different. The poverty's more intense. But ultimately, one of the biggest lessons was people are the same everywhere. So the government had been developing their antiretroviral treatment program. And we sort of integrated into the government program. And each of these organizations, these grassroots organizations that we had visited, had some kind of resource related to being able to help the women. But we had envisioned that we would develop a mobile service. And the women said, no. That's not what we need. We already have a little clinic. What we need is for you to train our nurses. So we make modifications on the model, the biggest one being we make it much more efficient so that you can deliver the most care to the most people. So we have 4 nurses and 1 doctor. We have the pharmacy right next door. We've designed it so that the patient can come in, see the receptionist, see the nurse, see the pharmacy, leave, and not spend all day there. Within a couple of months, we had brought several hundred women into care, and they didn't die, right? They lived and they're living. Over time, we brought 6,500 people into care, and we did HIV testing for 48,000 people. So over time, Rwanda developed one of absolutely the best HIV treatment programs in the world, not just in Africa, in the world. Once they were treated, their next request was, please test my children, which we did. And we care for their children if they're infected. But then there became more difficult questions. Please help me find a job. Please help me send my children to school. Now, over time, we did develop those services also. So my middle daughter, the one who had first gone with me to Rwanda when she was 16, I guess 2 years later, she developed a program to send kids to school. And the way she did it was she tied a community in Rwanda to a community in the US. And the burden of administration mostly falls on the two communities. So in the first year, we enrolled 350 kids. So secondary school is boarding school. You know, it's grades like 7 to 12 for us, and they get fed there. But the rest of the kids were hungry, the primary school kids. And right around that time, there was this repeated literature coming out that kids who are hungry, their brains develop poorly, and it's irreversible by the age of 2. So finally we decided we had to include food, which is expensive. So in other words, you could pay to send a kid to primary school for $20 a year. That is, you do an incentive to the teacher, you do the uniforms, the books, the pens, the pencils, that kind of stuff. But it costs $130 a year to give them all breakfast. So we did it though. And the community in Rwanda developed a system where they provide a high-protein porridge every day for every kid who needs it. The program started, I think, in January of 2006. And I went back to visit in April in 2006. And the community organization, this was done through one of our partner NGOs, had a celebration to which, you know, I was the guest of honor, actually. So I come to the celebration, and they bring all the kids in. And I looked out over a sea of healthy children. They didn't have ringworm, their hair was shiny, they didn't have big bellies. And this is just because we provided this one thing of high protein porridge. I can barely talk about this without weeping. But to me, that was a profound moment of learning, that you could make something happen and you could make things better. And actually my daughter said something a little similar once that sometimes helps me keep going, because believe me, there are times I want to stop. She said it in an essay when she was a senior in high school, and she said on her first trip to Rwanda, one thing that she learned was, as a single person, you can make a difference if you just keep going. If you just look at the obstacles and find a way past them or around them. And a lot of times that's what it is. That's what we do.